According to the U.S. Department of Education, black students were more than 3 times as likely to attend schools where fewer than 60% of teachers meet all state verification and licensure requirements. One of the most pressing topics of inequality is public education. Throughout the history of the U.S. education system, inequality has persisted. My name is Daniel Nguyen.
My name is Christian McGee.
My name is Juan Jose Tabores.
I'm Jaden Moore.
And I'm against it one.
Landmark events such as Little Rock 9, Brown versus Board of Education, and the passing of Title IX are all famed for overcoming race or sex barriers to educational inequality. Decades after these events, questions still emerge over whether sufficient action has really been brought to equalize education. This begs the question: since the 20th century, to what extent has the concept of equality developed in the United States education system? After extensive research, it's been concluded that although efforts have been made to advance equality in the U.S. education system, divisions still exist within social and economical classes. We'll be taking a look at this issue through race, gender, income, and progress as a whole.
While cultural diversity may be rising in America, the lack of African American students in alternative education systems such as charter schools and nursing programs is actually decreasing, which causes more of them to go to public schools, and even dropout rates increasing, which causes a total of negative consequences for African Americans as a whole. As you can see here, for every black student, there's nearly 3 times as many white students, which may cause a lack of cultural identity within African Americans. And this has not helped with the ratio of black teachers to white teachers, and the salary does not help this fact at all. As you can see here, this is the percentage of 8th grade students who performed at or above the proficient level for each of these subjects. And none of these are even the black students perform at half the amount the white students do. And this just shows the consequences of an inaccurate education system.
All right. Another factor that faces the gender inequality, as we can see here, female senior educational leaders are underrepresented within higher education. As we can see here, a national amount of female percentages for the presidents and chancellors in universities and colleges, only 22%, with the top 10 institutions having 0% of provosts. This is despite women holding 50% of the higher education holdings. Relating back to Christian's point, there is a statistically significant difference between white women and women of color when it comes to senior educational leaders. According to the Advancing Women Leadership Journal, under the umbrellas of security and criticism and lack of opportunity and support, more than double the discrimination is put towards women of color compared to white women. The lack of diversity at the senior-most level of higher education institutions limits the success of individuals, institutions, and the sector as a whole. Next slide. Another factor of inequality that women face is the discrimination due to the gender roles. As we can see here, women take a high percentage over majors such as early childhood education and family sciences. This is due to the gender roles placed upon women of being responsible for caregiving and household family work. They are then undercompensated for, as you can see here, in the low wages provided to those that partake in these majors. Contrary, majors where women are not prevalent in, as seen here, are dominated by men, giving them high pay in these majors. This is due to the gender roles placed upon men of being rich breadwinners that are dominant, which undermines women, value and efforts of women, causing massive pay discrepancies between men and women. This connects back to the point of women being underrepresented within higher education, as women that are not guided by those that have these higher educational positions can take on the gender roles placed on them by society, instead of achieving what they could have truthfully wanted if we had an equal education system.
It is evident that income for school districts are significant in the education system, since that can determine the opportunities available to students. However, since school income is heavily reliant on property taxes and the race makeup of a district is usually dominated by one race, schools in districts with a large white population tend to be wealthier and have better funding. As a result, the allocation of resources is on average primarily concentrated to schools that are predominantly white while their black counterparts fall behind. Even with tax funding concentrated to education in lower value districts, they still continue to fall behind, as rich districts still retain the upper hand through other income, such as from wealthy donors.
Alright, so moving on to progress made, throughout time many changes have been made to overcome the inequality disparities which exist in the educational system. These changes have benefited many aspects of education, bringing equity and quality to all in the best and most efficient way as possible. So an example of this can be seen with the College Equity Act of 2019, which provided grants to universities and encouraged them to conduct equity audits, which are basically funding and opportunities given to the students going to those universities who were marginalized or lived in impoverished areas. And then the second act, which can be seen with the Brown versus Board of Education, and this ruled separate but equal was unconstitutional. Ever since this act was passed, African Americans have seen great accomplishments being made in the science and math fields, pursuing great fields in their future. And here we have a graph which shows that ever since Brown's Board of Education was passed around in the 1960s, we have seen an upward trend in the percentage of black students in majority white schools, the numbers almost doubling in the years. And then however, after this, we could see that the numbers slowly decline. And this leads us to the fact what progress still needs to be made. So progress to be made involves the Supreme Court of California because they found that substantial disparities in the expenditures have continued to exist due to the tax regulations enforced on low-wealth districts. So these taxes were heavily enforced on these low-wealth districts, and this was impacting the schools there because these taxes were therefore taking the school's ability away to provide for these opportunities, and instead were forcing them to pay more to the districts rather than work on the schools themselves. And we could see the post-Cooper versus Aaron Supreme Court case where little change has been seen to remediate the discrimination which still exists in schools today.
After taking a look at all the research, three main solutions have stuck out. The first one being government should allocate more funding to schools in more impoverished districts and areas to raise the average quality of education as a whole. However, this has several limitations to it. The first being that the necessary money to fund something like this would be high. This would mean taking it from social institutions or high taxes. There would also be the issue of delegating money appropriately. Even now, money is not equally distributed amongst districts and different institutions, and what would change if we started doing this again? The second solution would be redrawing of school district lines to incorporate more neighborhoods of varying income levels. This would be a slow process, however, because of the difficulty and the sheer amount of districts that exist in the United States. There would also be opposition by those in better districts as they wouldn't want to lose their high quality district. And there would also be the issue of convincing the public that this would be a good step towards equality. And the final solution being that providing more opportunities to those of lower income to give them a chance for educational mobility. However, this is simply just putting a Band-Aid on a big wound. This doesn't address the whole problem, and it would still leave those that slip through the cracks. And as with the first one, there would be issues with funding. As with anything changing social institutions, we would need money for them. Thank you.
Okay, we're just going to start down here and work our way across with questions. All right, so you have 5 people in your group. If you had a 6th member of your group, what perspective could they bring that would have been helpful in this process?
So we did talk about race, but one thing we did not talk about was immigration, and I think including immigration and efforts such as like how they get treated from moving abroad. So like anybody coming from like a foreign country for college, they may be treated differently than from like a local individual, and that's what they would probably do theirs on.
Okay. Describe an argument from one of their research oh my God, describe an argument from some of their research that makes you think differently about the solution you guys came up with.
JJ's argument talks about gender roles, and we didn't really address that at the beginning for our solution, but on the last solution that we had which was providing more opportunities, we tried to address that, although vaguely, by saying that we should provide more opportunities, and this could include for gender roles or for different races as well.
All right, thank you. Third one up, Danielle. What's a way in which your team's solution makes you think differently about the research you conducted?
So our solution of redrawing property lines makes me think different about our entire situation, because it really opened my eyes to the many different solutions out there that can be used to solve this problem, and it doesn't have to be tackled using traditional methods like passing laws and stuff like that.
All right. Bhagesh, what's an example of a compelling argument from one of the research that someone else conducted that you didn't use, and why didn't you use it?
Okay, so like a compelling argument which JJ had, and there's evidence for that, which showed the fact that many women in today's society in these major fields, they're not being paid as much as the men who are also in those fields. And this shows the fact that women need more representation, not even more representation in these higher fields, but also need the pay gap to be reduced between the women and the men.
And last question, JJ. Which one of their research had the greatest impact on your group's, the whole process for your group?
I feel that Christian's research on the disparities of black students really had an impact, because although I knew there was some disparities between black and white students, I didn't know the severities. Also, something that we didn't include in our report was that black students were many times 60% more likely to have teachers that weren't capable of teaching them compared to white students, which is an astronomical statistic. And it highlighted the severity of the issue on a much grander scale than I anticipated.